development with the agency. And we are going to start off our first series of the Economic Development 101 with Let's Talk About Tax Credits. For this session, we will be talking about low-income housing tax credits, historic tax credits, as well as new market tax credits, and showing some examples on how all of these work. We will be having 2 more of these sessions, ED 101 sessions, over the next remaining months of the year on different topics, including our programs here at the agency, as well as everything else that we do here at the agency. So an all-encompassing agency overview. For today's session, we would like to welcome Kevin Gremse with National Development Council. Kevin is an economic development professional with over 2 decades of experience. Kevin has used his working knowledge of business credit and real estate underwriting and proven experience with federal, state, and local economic development incentive programs to structure business and real estate development transactions exceeding $2 billion throughout the country. As Senior Director of NDC, Kevin manages a team of professionals who work in over 30 municipalities in the Eastern United States. And he's a great asset for us here at the agency, as we've relied on him for a number of different projects to look at, to decipher if it works or not. And we've continued to rely on him for this, as well as for these educational purposes for our community. I'll just, for housekeeping purposes, I'll also like to say that if you want to submit any questions you might have throughout the course of the presentation, we will get them and then ask Kevin throughout the whole series of the program. Otherwise, we'll have a couple minutes at the end to answer any questions as well. But with that, Kevin, I'd like to hand the floor over to you and talk about the program here.
Okay, great. Everyone hear me?
We're good.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Brendan. Happy to do this. NDC has been working with the agency for multiple years, and for some of the projects that they have on their plate, they bring to us for review and consideration. How do I advance this, Amy?
There you go.
Yeah, maybe go. Can I advance them?
So you have remote control over the screen, so you should be able to click through. It should have sent you a little, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. And I think what's on that front there is an as-complete rendering for the EJ Victory building that I'm sure many of you have seen under construction, and sure going to be a much improved as-complete product than what you've seen in the last few decades, as it has been vacant and underutilized. And certainly tax credits, in this case, federal tax credit, federal and state housing credits is the key, one of the key features of being able to put together a capital structure to make financial sense out of that rehabilitation. So Brendan just mentioned a little bit about me. I'll just give you a quick snapshot summary of NDC. NDC is a national nonprofit. We work throughout the country. We've been around for about 50 years. We only work for municipalities. And the short of it is that we help our municipalities get their prioritized projects done. We often look at these projects to right-size a public incentive package to create financial feasibility without providing more than what's necessary. And then over the years, we've also created a whole range of products, affiliated products, that we activate as appropriate in the communities in which we work. So we have a small business lending company, we have a development division, we have equity tax credit arms, where we have an affiliate that purchases housing and historic credits. And then we also received multiple allocations of new market tax credits since that program's inception about 2 decades ago. So the short of it is that we use our experience as a lender, as a developer, and as a equity investor, and use that to bear to provide advisory services to municipalities to get their prioritized projects done. So as Brendan mentioned, we're going to cover 3 federal tax credits. It should be noted that with historic credits and low-income housing tax credits, there's also state historic credits and state housing credits. But we're going to focus on the federal. So we're first going to cover the rehabilitation tax credit, which we also call historic tax credits. We're going to cover low-income housing tax credits. And we'll see that there's 2 types of credits. There's a 9% competitive credit, and then there's also a 4% credit, which is more as of right, but needs to be coupled with private activity tax exempt bonds. So what our objective is, and because we only have 1 hour, and because there's a lot of complications with these federal tax credits, we're going to go fairly quickly. And what we really want to convey to you is how these credits can be used for purposes of attracting private investment in exchange for those tax credits to be part of a capital structure for eligible projects and difficult projects for which your project costs exceed the as complete fair market value. So you need a means by which you can raise private investment as part of the capital structure. And the last credit that we'll review is new market tax credits. Now we have a 3-day class in new market tax credits, and I'm going to cover it in about 15 or 20 minutes. So just a broad overview of eligibility and what is a good fit for new market tax credits. Tax credits, federal tax credits, it's a dollar for dollar reduction of tax liability. So for those investors that purchase the credits, they're able to reduce their federal tax exposure by $1. Now, given that, they don't normally pay $1 for the credits. They pay a discounted amount for those credits. So it depends on what the credit is, but generally speaking, the investors are paying anywhere from 78 cents on the dollar to 95 cents on the dollar for these credits. And I'll go through that with each of the respective federal credits. Historic credits, and you'll sometimes hear low-income housing tax credits referred to as LIHTC, LIHTC for the acronym low-income LIHT, and for reasons that I'll discuss later on, I just generally refer to it as a housing tax credit because indeed it is a credit that provides investment for more than what is considered low-income housing tax credits. And depending on the area median income, it could be a means by which you could raise equity for what really would be considered workforce or even market rate housing. And then we'll, as I mentioned, we'll cover new market tax credits. So these are really important resources for us to work with. For those of you who are active in the economic development world, we have to look at the broad range of resources to be part of a capital structure for some developments that have financial challenges. For certain properties, they're not going to be able to attract private investment on their own just because the investment community looks as some properties and in some markets of saying, hey, the returns aren't guaranteed. We have a cost valuation imbalance. So it's important to learn these resources to be part of the capital structure. Because one of the things that we very commonly see, we look and we pull together and assemble a development budget, and then we assemble an operating budget, and then we estimate what the as complete value is. For a lot of the projects that we look at, we'll see that the project cost exceeds the estimated as complete fair market value. If the project cost exceeds the as complete fair market value, that means that there's a gap in the project, and you'll need to find various ways to fill that gap with various resources. For real estate deals, tax credits is a very powerful way in which we can attract outside investment to help cover the costs of development. I mentioned that cost value differential, and there's a whole range of reasons for which we have cost value differentials. On the valuation side, valuations is a function of an income stream of a development. So we use the income approach. And in other words, we look at the income stream of a real estate development and we capitalize that to determine its fair market value. And when you have lower rents, relative to that product that you placed into service, you're going to have a limited valuation. One of the challenges right now is for those of you who are dealing with real estate developers as a lender, as an economic development official, or as an appointed or an elected official, what we're hearing all in the marketplace right now is how high or how much construction costs have increased. Construction costs have increased, but due to increased material costs, and in some cases, increased labor costs. And then some of these developments have what I call extraordinary costs, where you have remediation. You have to clean up activities for a brownfield property, or you have considerable infrastructure, or you have demolition costs, and in some cases you have to provide the necessary infrastructure with you for the utilities. So those are what I mean extraordinary costs, costs that are not normally part of every development, but it is a true cost, and we have to find ways to cover those extraordinary costs, and that's why we have those cost value differentials. So the first credit that we're going to go through is the official name of it is rehabilitation tax credits, and sometimes I refer to it as RTC, but essentially the rehabilitation tax credit is a historic tax credit, and we're going to focus on the federal tax credit in the interest of time. So the federal historic tax credit is a 20% one-time credit on the rehabilitation costs. And actually, the 20% is is the credit amount, but based upon the Tax Reform Act of 2018, actually that was spread out over 5 years. So whoever purchases those credits, an outside investor, they have to spread it out over 5 years. So not every building, not every property is eligible for this. The property has to be designated as historically significant. Historically significant, it either needs to be designated by the New York State Historic Preservation Office as historically significant, or it has to be recognized as a contributing building in a historic district. So the basis the cost that we can include for the calculation of the historic credits is mostly the construction and the related soft costs. So you cannot include the land acquisition or the acquisition of the property as part of the basis, because you only look at the rehabilitation costs and related soft costs. So those are some of the costs that can be included in the basis for determining the tax credits. This is a wildly simplistic example, but say you have a building for which your rehabilitation costs and related soft costs add up to $10 million. The credit rate is 20 cents on the dollar. Well, I'm sorry, the credit rate is 20% of that basis. So the historic tax credit in that instance, the RTC, as you see on your screen, would be $2 million. If those $2 million, if you wanted to monetize it and sell it to an outside investor who wants a dollar for dollar for reduction, they're not going to pay you $1 for those credits, but they might pay you 85 cents. They might pay you 80 cents on the dollar. So you can see by which in a development that has approximately $10 million of rehabilitation costs, you're going to net about $1.7 million of investment through an outside investor who is going to purchase that. Unfortunately, the organizational structure that allows for you to sell, a developer to sell those credits, the IRS rules require that outside investor actually becomes part of the ownership. So that outside investor is mostly banks or a syndicated fund that is made up of banks and corporations. And that individual bank or that syndicated fund that is a group of banks would purchase those credits. However, that investor, that limited partner investor, would need to be part of the ownership structure. And usually you put together a limited partnership, and the developer is the general partner, and the limited partner is the outside investor. But you look at the ownership structure there, that doesn't necessarily help a developer who does all of the work, the general partner, they look at that and they said, that doesn't make any sense. How will I do all of this work and only own 1/10 of 1% of the development? It has to be that way, because if the outside investor is going to get all of the credits are going to be a function of the ownership structure. So the ownership structure then becomes a 99.9% ownership structure of the outside investor. But that's going to allow them to get 99.9% of the credits. But the developer obviously is going to want to reap the other benefits. So they'll want to get the cash flow benefits and the appreciation. But they don't get it in the form of a distribution of cash flow. They get it in the form of earning a fee. So all of that cash flow is bled off and earned as a fee instead of being a distribution of cash flow. So it gets a little bit cumbersome. It gets a little bit complicated in terms of putting together these ownership structures. That's why you need a development of considerable size in order for it to be worth it. So you probably need a development that you have a rehab cost of $10 million or more. And in Broome County, those are few and far between. But for an instance like the Victory building, or the building, what's the other building downtown, the historic building that just placed into service, that Paulus did, Brendan?
Ansco.
Anvil building.
Ansco.
Yeah. There are a few buildings that represent considerable rehab costs for which these credits can be utilized. The Anvil building downtown Binghamton, and certainly the EJ Victory building. What's really important is to have an experienced development team. That includes the developer, the architect, the builder, the consultant, in putting these deals together, because they're quite cumbersome, they're quite difficult. The development process is going to be a little bit lengthier, because you're going to have to get approval of your rehabilitation plans to demonstrate that your rehabilitation plan is going to make the building look like it did when it was originally built. So
I have a quick question for you.
Yep.
So in regards to these rehabilitative tax credits, if you have a property that's currently owned by a municipality, but has a private developer as the end user, how would you structure? Would you have to create a new LLC? Would you have to create a new?
Yeah, you'd have to create a new ownership structure to get it out of ownership of the city, because you'd have to create a structure that would allow for the credits to be utilized. So if you had a city-owned building or a town-owned building, you might be able to do a land lease, and then have the ownership structure of the building you establish a new ownership structure that would allow for the credits to be utilized. But a municipally owned building would not work for utilizing the tax credits.
Thank you.
So many of you know this building, a iconic building in Johnson City. I don't know how many years it was vacant, but from what I understand, it was decades that was underutilized and/or vacant. So there weren't a whole lot of developers that are rushing to tackle a building like this, but a developer that has considerable experience with tax credits, it might make sense, but you need a whole range of resources. So you need the federal credit, you need the state historic credit, and then there was some ARPA money that I believe was made available for this building as well. So I don't have all of the details with the structure. What I'm going to just simply outline for you, as I understand it, the development program is 228 units. There's also quite a bit of a modest amount of commercial square feet, up to 3,500 square feet. So the total building is about 275,000 square feet. That's a big building. That's a behemoth. And the total development cost is approximately $50 million. That is things that I took from a newspaper article, not necessarily things that I learned from the capital structure, because I think when the developer initially looked at it, they were going to do it in phases and have a smaller number of units. So if the development cost is roughly $50 million, not all of those costs would be included in the basis. I just estimated that like 95%, 90% of it would be included in the basis. So if the basis is $45 million, the credit is 20%. So that would allow the developer to pass on credits to an outside investor of $9 million. If it sells those credits for 85 cents on the dollar, it's going to raise roughly $7.6 million. $7.6 million is roughly 15% of the development cost. That 15% is essential for being part of the capital structure, because that allows the developer to have to raise less equity from itself and other outside investors for other financial benefits. So, and then you couple that with state housing tax credits. That's what creates a development that is in the realm of financial feasibility. So in economic development jargon, we use the phrase, but for to the utilization of a certain resource, this development is not financially feasible. But for the use of this historic tax credit, but for the availability of federal and state tax credits, this development is not financially feasible. Okay, segueing into low-income housing tax credits, or what I just referred to as housing tax credits, or what you hear in the industry, in the market, called LIHTC. LIHTC, housing tax credits, federal housing tax credits, is the single largest source of funding, not direct funding, because the federal government only provides the credits, but the credits is the basis by which we raise private investment. So the private investment through the utilization of federal tax credits is the single largest resource to encourage and incentivize the development of affordable housing throughout the country. So the low-income housing tax credit was established as part of the Tax Reform Act of 1986. So it is a fairly mature program that's been around for more than 30 years. It's a very complicated program, but it is a mature industry, and there's a lot of developers and investors and consultants that have learned it and do this well. The developers that develop affordable housing tend to do this as their niche, because it's a very specialized type of development, because it's a lot of rules and regulations with respect to how you utilize these federal tax credits. So those projects that qualify for the utilization of affordable housing tax credits, or LIHTC, or housing tax credits, it must qualify based upon three criteria: income occupancy, rent, and state approval. We'll go through all three of those. First, the rents. All of the units must be designated as affordable based upon the number of bedrooms and the assumed household size. There's an imputed household size of 1.5 persons per bedroom. I skipped income occupancy. So basic eligibility: at least 20% of the units must be occupied by tenants with incomes below 50% of area median income, or 40% of the units must be occupied by tenants with incomes below 60% of median income. So what's, Brendan, I forget, what's median income in your MSA?
I do believe it's right around 46,000.
Yeah, so 46. So I could probably use the next. Okay, probably need to use the next slide for how those affordable rents are calculated. So the example here suggests that the median income in the area is 40,000. In Broome County, or your metropolitan MSA, metropolitan statistical area, it's 46,000. So the rents would be a little bit higher than what is shown in this example. So they assume that the household size of a 2-bedroom unit is 1.5 persons. So for a 2-bedroom, it would be 3-person household. Median income for a 3-person household is 40,000. So your AMI is 46,000, but that AMI is adjusted per household size. So 60% of the median is 24,000. So that would be 2,000 per month. So the maximum rent, and for affordability, we assume that we want to keep it affordable by allowing no more than 30%, or establishing the affordable rent based upon 30% of annual income. So 30% of the 2,000, which is the monthly income, is $600. So $600 becomes the basis for that affordable rent for a family at 60% of median income. And then we use a utility allowance that we normally get from the local HUD office to determine how much is going to be the responsibility of the tenant. And you net that out so that we would have a contract rent of $520 per month. I think in Binghamton, for a two-bedroom unit, your affordable rent at 60% of area median income would be slightly higher than $520, because your median income is higher than the 40 that's used in this example. And you don't have to go through all of this math. New York State Homes and Community Renewal, HCR, they are the housing finance agency for the state. And if you go on HCR's website, they'll, for every metropolitan statistical area, they'll give you the maximum incomes and the eligible rents for all of the various median income ranges. Because oftentimes you have a tiered affordability structure. So you have certain units that are at 30% of area median income, which are extremely low income rents. Then you have rents at 50% of area median income, very low income rents. And then you have 60% rents, which are designated as affordable. And then New York State also has programs that help subsidize units that are considered workforce. Generally speaking, units that are priced affordable for households earning between 60 and 90% of area median income. But I should note, for federal housing tax credits, only the units that are priced less than 60% of area median income are the units for which you're able to claim credits for. So those workforce units, it might be part of the mix, but you're not going to claim credits on those, but you have other resources at New York State, and then perhaps locally at the county level or the city level, that might provide funds for so-called workforce units that are normally considered 30 to 60 to 90% of AMI. So in New York State Homes and Community Renewal is the housing finance agency, as I mentioned. Federal tax credits are allocated to each individual state, and the administrator is each of the housing finance agencies in the state. As I said, in New York State, it's HCR. So in New York State, because the population is it says $20 million, the population is 20 million. So New York State receives approximately $52 million of annual allocation every year, but those credits are going to be spread over 10 years. So in reality, what New York State receives is $500 million, a little bit more than $500 million of credits. And that seems like a lot of money, a lot of credits, $500 million. But that is spread over a big state, and it has to be utilized to cover a broad range of affordable housing needs, because we have a lot of aged affordable housing stock that needs substantial capital improvements. So you want to use the credits for preservation deals where you have to do a whole new capital improvements. You want to use it for rehabilitation projects for existing buildings. And then you also want to use it for new construction, encourage new construction. And there's a broad range of housing needs to cover the cost of units that are priced for extremely low income, very low income, and workforce. In New York State, it's a little bit different. You have New York City, that's part of New York State, and New York City is kind of completely it's a very different marketplace. So in New York City, they have their own housing finance agency called Housing Preservation and Development. And they get their pro rata share of credits to be utilized in New York City alone. And then HCR administers the credits for the rest of the state. There's two types of credits. There's and the availability of those credits from the previous slide is 520 million. That covers the state. That is only the credit amount available for 9% competitive credits. There's also an as of right 4% credit, and that needs to be utilized with private activity tax exempt bonds. So these credits, whether it be 9% credit or 4% credits, they can't be claimed by the investor in the first year. They're spread out over 10 years. I'll give you, and then like I gave you what can be included in the basis for the historic credit, these are some of the costs that can be included in the basis for the housing credit. So just in terms of the math of how this is monetized, in example number 1, you have a $6 million development. And, oh yeah, there's such a thing called difficult to develop areas or qualified census tracts. And those are areas that are either very difficult to develop based upon land cost, or a qualified census tract, which is a low income census tract. And then you can get a boost to your basis if you're in a qualified census tract or a difficult to develop area. So in this example, we have new construction project in the qualified census tract. So it's a mixed income, it's a mixed use deal. You'll see that of the $6 million, 3.9 million is attributable to the residential. It's set in a qualified census tract. So to be included in the residential basis or the housing basis is only residential related costs. So only the 3.9. We provide a 30% increase to the basis. So the adjusted credit basis is 5 million. We sell that for 9 cents, or the credit amount is 9% of that. So the annual low-income housing tax credit is 456. We multiply it by 10 because you get 10 years of credits. So you have the total number of housing tax credits is a little bit more than $4.5 million. You sell it for 98 cents on the dollar. Actually, that was an example from a few years ago. The market is no longer as robust as that, but assuming that you did sell it for 98 cents on the dollar, you'd raise about almost $4.5 million. You see that $4.5 million is that's almost 3/4 of the whole development budget. So you can see that through the use of housing tax credits, you're able to sell it and monetize it to cover a very substantial amount of the project costs. And the reason that is important and the reason that's needed is that we're dealing with restricted rents, and those restricted rents provide limited income. When you have limited income, you have limited borrowing capacity. So for these affordable housing developments, usually the dollar amount that's raised in equity off of the sale of the tax credits is a lot more than what you can support, the developer can support in debt based upon that limited income stream. Here we have another example. This is new construction, and in this case, we're not going to use competitive 9% credits. We're going to be using 4% credits, and that should be 4%, not because that 4% credit used to fluctuate. It used to be variable. Now it's locked in. So that really should be 4%, and the maximum annual low-income housing tax credit, if that was 4%, would be 400. And the total amount of credits would be $4 million, not $3,060,000. And then you sell it for a targeted amount. And then in this case, you're raising about 1/3 of the project costs through the use of low-income housing tax credits. There's also a 4% credit that could be utilized associated with the acquisition of an existing building. So you could have a 4% credit on the acquisition cost of a building. and 9% for all other eligible costs. So that's the example here. You have a $6 million development. We have a 9% that can be claimed on the rehabilitation costs. And then we have a 4% credit that can be claimed on the acquisition. So the credits combined is $394,000. Those credits are spread over 10 years. So there's $3.9 million of credits available. You sell that at 95 cents on the dollar. You're raising 3.7. That is part of the $6 million development costs. Now, a few things to note here. These purchase prices, these are examples from several years ago where the LIHTC investment market was paying a lot more for the credits than they are right now. So you wouldn't see the investors paying this high a dollar amount of credits anymore because of various changes in the marketplace. But nevertheless, you'll see through very simplistic examples of how those credits can be monetized so that you raise private investment that becomes part of the capital structure. When this program was first introduced, it had a 15-year compliance period. Very quickly, Congress and other elected officials realized that these are a lot of resources only to keep these units affordable for 15 years. So soon after the program was introduced, Congress introduced an extended use period. So if a developer and a development uses housing tax credits, at a minimum, you're going to have a 30-year rent restriction period. And in fact, HCR and HFA, the sister New York State agencies, they normally require developments to have at least 40, and in some cases, 50-year rent affordability requirements. So that if there's a significant investment upfront to get these developments met, there will be long-term commitments to keep those units as affordable, based upon the acute need that we have for affordable housing throughout New York State. In order for you're not going to use housing tax credits for something like a 10 or a 12 unit development, because these are enormously complicated developments to pull together. Oftentimes they'll take 2 or 3, in some cases I've seen 4 and 5 years to pull together the capital structure and get all entitlement and permitting. So usually the minimum size that you see for a housing tax credit development is probably throughout New York State 30 units or more. Maybe in a few of the rural areas you might see a 20 unit development, but from development standpoint, developers like larger developments. The larger the development, the larger the higher their developer fee is going to be. So developers, if they're going to put all of the effort to put together a housing tax credit structure, they want a development that as large as possible, because their their fee is going to be higher based upon a larger development. So the market for these tax credits is, I would say, 85 to 95 cents on the dollar, probably in the mid 80s is more common. Can you combine historic credits and housing tax credits? Yes. IRS doesn't like double dipping of federal credits, so they always ask you to make an adjustment. So when you use both historic credits and housing tax credits, you have to make an adjustment for the dollar amount of the historic credit on your housing tax credit basis. So you reduce, so again, I told you that there's a lot of rules. We're trying to cover this very quickly. It's very difficult to cover all of the rules and regulations relative to housing tax credit development in our very limited time frame for this webinar. So this is not a development in Broome County. It is in a little bit way upstate in Watertown. NDC, in this case, was the limited partner investor. I'd mentioned the fact that we have an affiliated equity fund. So in this case, we were the investor. And when I say we were the investor, we have a corporate equity fund, and we raise about $200 million of equity through our bank partners we pool it and invest in, we invest in these projects in exchange for the credits, and then we pass the credits on to all the investors, i.e. the banks that are in our fund. And this is a case that there was both housing credits and historic credits, and NDC Corporate Equity Fund, we invested in both the housing and historic credits. So in this development, I think it was roughly 50 units. The project cost was a little bit less than 16 million. And you'll see how the credits were monetized. The credits were sold at about 85 cents on the dollar. If you look at historic credits and low-income housing tax credits combined, they're about 51% of the project cost. $9.7 million raised between the two. So that covers a very substantial portion of the development costs at 15.8. Actually, those two combined are more than, I took that off of what I thought was the project cost. So these two are more than 51%. They're close to 2/3 of the project cost. Here's another mammoth former manufacturing mill. This is upstate Connecticut, and we wound up being the investor in this. This was a 3-phase project that ultimately 320 units were placed into service. And this is other development for which both historic credits and housing credits were utilized. So the first phase of this is $31 million. Between this federal and state historic credits, that was 29% of the capital structure. You'll see that there's 7 different sources of funding, and that's fairly typical of these complicated, larger developments. You have a complicated multi-source capital structure that is needed to cover the development cost. And these are just examples of how the credits are monetized. So you have the credits from the federal historic credits was $5 million, and the credits from the housing tax credit was roughly 3.9. You'll notice that there are a few adjustments on this. This was a mixed income development, and only 60% of the units were priced affordably to households less than 60% of area median income. So we have to apply that applicable fraction, covering the percentage of units that are qualify as affordable. So the workforce units and the market rate units could not, and the costs associated with those could not be included in the basis. And very quickly, there are other credits besides the competitive 9% credits, and those are 4% credits. And 4% credits, you still need to go through Homes and Community Renewal, and actually its sister agency, HFA. So you use 4% housing tax credits that are coupled with the issuance of private activity tax exempt bonds. So your credit facility has to be a tax exempt bond, and then you're able to utilize 4% credits. You know, the advantage of 4% credits is it's more as of right. It's not subject to a competitive process. The disadvantage is that 4% credits, you're raising a lot less equity than you are through the use of the 9% credits based upon the credit percentage. So many are familiar with the old IBM Country Club in Johnson City. Well, that's also been underutilized and or vacant for a considerable period of time. The agency put out an RFP, they selected a developer, and what they chose is a developer, Conifer, who's going to build housing at that site, and they're going to utilize that structure. Private activity bonds and 4% tax credits. So I think it's roughly a $31 million development. What is being utilized here is 4% tax credits. Again, you follow the math, you see how that 4% credit can be utilized to generate an annual credit of 1.1, total credits of $11 million. If the developer sells those credits for 93 cents on the dollar, they're going to raise roughly $10.2 million. $10.2 million is roughly 33% of the capital structure. So that's very important for purposes of covering the development costs. And you'll see that there's all other sources of funding that needs to be assembled to be part of the capital structure. So you have state low-income housing tax credits, you have other subordinated soft money, money that doesn't have a hard repayment schedule from HCR. And then Broome County was also able to contribute funding to be part of that capital structure. And that's fairly typical of these tax credit developments, that you have 6 or more sources of funding that's part of the capital structure. Okay, how to take a deep breath, maybe a little bit of water before I segue to new market tax credits. Brendan, are there any questions relative to housing or historic credits?
Nothing that I'm seeing come in, but if anybody has any questions, feel free to send them over through the chat and we'll have them answered.
Okay. All right. So I teach several classes that are week-long. That's part of NDC's Economic Development Finance Certification Series. We have 2 professional certifications, one in Economic Development Finance and one in Housing Development Finance. In the 4th of 4 classes of the Economic Development Finance Certification Program, we cover new market tax credits, and we cover it in about an hour. And I say during that class, it's very difficult to cover new market tax credits in 1 hour, because we actually have a class that is 3 days long. And we also have a webinar that's 3 hours long. And then we cover it in the art of deal structuring that I teach in an hour. So I'm going to reduce it furthermore to 10 minutes. New market tax credits, unlike is a commercial tax credit, because generally speaking, the market responded well to housing tax credits, and it's been responsible for raising billions of dollars of investment for the production of affordable housing throughout the country over the last 30 years. In 2000, Congress was saying that, hey, it's great that we have a housing credit to stimulate investment for affordable housing. It's great that we have a historic credit to stimulate investment for historic buildings, but we need a commercial tax credit. And therein was the birth of new market tax credits, which is a commercial tax credit. It's a commercial tax credit aimed to attract private investment for commercial development types, and that includes community facilities as well. But it's a specialized tax credit for commercial buildings, but it's also geographically specific. It's designed to attract investment into low-income census tracts, what we call qualified census tracts. So there's a limited amount of those eligible census tracts. So the agency that administers new market tax credits is the Department of Treasury. The division within the Department of Treasury is the Community Development Financial Institution Fund. And they have their website is cdfifund.org. What's important is to get familiar with the new market tax credits is making sure that a property is within a qualified census tract. So if I once looked last week, I looked at a map of Binghamton, only one of the municipalities within Broome County, and roughly half, maybe 2/3 of Binghamton were considered qualified census tracts. So that's number one. It's your project's got to be in a low-income census tract, because it was recognized that we need additional incentive to attract investment in low-income census tracts, whereby the income streams are lower and therefore the valuations are lower. So with new market tax credits, unlike housing tax credits and historic credits that are made available to projects, the CDFI fund provides credits and they make them available to entities that are called community development entities, CDEs. So those CDEs are affiliates of banks. Those CDEs are community development financial institutions. Those CDEs could be credit unions. Again, CDFI Fund, the Division of Treasury administers that, and on their website, it's a broad range of those CDEs that have received allocation. NDC has an affiliated CDE, and since the program's inception in 2003, we've received roughly $800 million of allocation, and we've closed about $3 billion of transactions with the credits that we've received. We also have relationships with the other CDEs throughout the country, and we help them and help our communities in terms of structuring these deals that would attract the interests of CDEs and their respective investors. So the historic credit is 20% credit. The housing credit is a 9% credit spread, let me go back. The historic credit is a 20% credit spread over 5 years. The housing credit is a 9% credit spread over 10 years. New market tax credit is a 39% credit spread over 7 years. So as you can see, with all of these federal tax credits, if there was a little bit more consistency from one to the next, it would be a lot easier, but they're all very complicated. They all have a lot of rules and regulations. That's why it's a very specialized industry. So the new market tax credit is a 39% credit that is utilized to attract outside investment. And so for a project, you pass on a 39% credit, and then you get investments for a discounted amount of that 39%. And then you have to, off of that investment, you have to cover all the transaction fees, which are quite considerable. The common eligible projects for new market tax credits, first off, it has to be in a qualified census tract. The types of projects that are getting done, the sweet spot for these projects are $5 to $20 million. So you're not going to do a small $1 million development with the use of new market tax credits because they're complicated structures. They involve considerable closing costs. So in order for it to be worth it, for most CDEs that provide the credits, they're looking for a project cost of at least $5 million or above. So the type of common projects, develop commercial, industrial, and retail real estate. Manufacturing companies, large-scale manufacturing companies that are doing an expansion, they tend to create a lot of jobs. The CDEs that have allocation, they want community impact. Community impact is best demonstrated with jobs. So the Chobani yogurt facility, it's a little bit further upstate. They did a huge $30 million expansion a few years ago, and there was all sorts of community development entities that wanted to be part of that transaction. And they used new market tax credits to raise private investment to help cover the cost of that expansion. Mixed use projects are eligible, but since this is a commercial tax credit, the new market tax credits only covers the commercial portion of mixed use projects. Community facilities are also very common and popular for new market tax credits. Things like community health centers. And, Brendan has been talking to me about a community health center, perhaps going into a targeted property in Broome County. It's a huge project, but unfortunately, I think that property, Brendan, is not in a qualified census tract. We'll have to check that. Things like YMCAs and Boys and Girls Club are types of projects that have been funded with new market tax credits. So there's a whole new lexicon of CDE of acronyms. So you have community development entities that receive the allocation. The investment into the projects are called qualified equity investments. And then I just don't have the time or the brain power to go into QLICBs and QLICs. The QLICI, the qualified low-income community, or the QLICB is actually the project. That's the project itself, the qualified active low-income community business. So the CDEs are the ones that receive allocation from the federal government, and they're the ones that go out and find the projects for which they're going to utilize these credits and sell to their outside investors. In 95% of the cases, those outside investors that purchase the credits are corporations. Well, they're all corporations, but in 95% or more of the developments, the investors are the banks. So the structure for these new market tax credits is what we call a leverage flow, leverage transaction. So if we have a source of funding that we want to leverage through this investment fund, we can take a source of funds and invest it into the investment fund. And then we can, for purposes of attracting an outside investor who's going to get the benefit of tax credits that are 39% of what goes into this investment fund. So let's put numbers to that. So the investors don't pay dollar for dollar, they pay a discounted amount. So usually those outside investors, those banks, they're looking for a 7 to 9% internal rate of return. So as a result, they'll pay a discounted amount for those credits. So in this example on 46, you have $1 million investment. The credits associated with that $1 million investment is $390,000. The investor is not going to pay $390,000. They'll pay $276,000, which is a discounted amount based upon the discount factor. So they'll pay $276,000, which is roughly 76 cents on the dollar for the credits that they'll receive spread over 7 years. So in this case, we have $7 million of available, whether it be equity or debt. And instead of going right into the project itself, the Quiliqby, that's the project, instead it will be invested into an investment fund. That $7 million is going to leverage $3 million of investment. Together, the 7 million and the 3 million is 10 million. That 10 million becomes the qualified equity investment. That qualified equity investment is the basis upon which the credit's going to be determined. So the credits are $3.9 million. So in this type of transaction, it's a leverage new market tax credit structure where we take $7 million, we leverage it to attract $3 million. And this new market tax credit investor, they invest $3 million to get 3.9 in credits. And that's going to allow them a roughly 9% internal rate of return. And that's the only thing that they expect to get back are those credits. So they pay a discounted amount, i.e. $3 million in exchange for that 3.9. So to go through those numbers a little bit clearer, again, these are the numbers from the previous slide. The previous slide, we take $7 million, we use it to leverage $3 million in investment. So together in that investment fund is $10 million. In that investment fund is $10 million. You invest it into a qualified, you invest it as a qualified equity investment into the CDE. The CDE is going to pass back to the investor $3.9 million of credits. So the investor, based upon leveraging that $7 million, invests $3 million in exchange for $3.9 million. So they're basically paying 70 cents on the dollar for those credits, and that's going to yield them somewhere between an 8 and a 9% internal rate of return, based upon the benefits of those credits spread over 7 years. So leveraging new market tax credits equity, what types of funds can be levered? You could use public sector grants or subordinated soft sources of funding from, like ARPA funds. And a lot of this, a lot of the ARPA money over the last few years for new market tax credits have been leveraged. Some New York State money, New York State, Empire State Development Corporation through the projects of regional significance. They have provided a lot of grant money for projects of regional significance. If there's a project of regional significance and you get a New York State money, those funds could be leveraged through a new market tax credit structure. Also very popular to leverage philanthropy dollars, fundraising dollars, leverage developer equity. You also have the ability to leverage debt, but it's a little bit more complicated to get the authorization of lenders to allow their debt to be leveraged. But if you can lever it, it's terrific for purposes of attracting private outside investment. So general advice with new market tax credit deals. Develop relationships with CDEs. Again, CDEs are the community development entities that have an allocation of credits. Get professionals, qualified professionals with work and knowledge of new market tax credits involved. Again, a very highly specialized industry, very expensive transactions, but for the right transaction, it could be a difference maker in terms of creating financial feasibility. And I was asking around, and I was coming up short in terms of examples of projects in Broome County that have utilized new market tax credits. And I came up short, so I just given you here a few examples of the types of projects. In West Virginia, we use allocation to provide credits to raise private investment in this a barrel manufacturing company that was located in an extremely distressed census tract in West Virginia. And it was big time job creation in terms of 35 new, very high paying full-time equivalent jobs in an area that had very, very high unemployment rate. In this case, it was a mixed use development in Athens, Georgia, down the block from University of Georgia. Really market transformative development in a redeveloping area. In Cleveland, we use new market tax credits for a federally qualified health center to provide health services to very low income residents in that particular census tract. So those are the types of projects that we utilize and we seek to utilize new market tax credits. Within Broome County, there's a lot of the county that qualifies as non-metro, i.e. rural part of the county. If you have a high impactful project that's going to have high community impact, then it's going to be a project that's $5 million or more, that might be a fit. That would be not only a fit for new market tax credits, but attract the interest of community development entities. So I went through that very quickly. I'm a few minutes behind in terms of the hour allocation, but if there are any of you that have questions, I'd be happy to answer those questions.
Hey, Kevin, that's a marathon session there. I think you did a great job trying to cover all that information in such a short period of time. And I think you're not even over in time since we gave a 5-minute buffer in time for people to get in. So great job. Round of applause.
Yeah. Thank
you. Do we have any questions coming in, Amy?
No, not yet.
Not seeing any, but we will share this presentation. We are recording it. We'll share it with our different sources and get it out there to see if we have any questions. And if anything does come up, we'll send them your way, Kevin, and see if we can get some answers.
Okay. Very good.
Thanks a lot for everybody participating. And like I said before, we're going to have 2 more programs similar to this over the next couple of months. I think one is going to be in October and the next one's going to be in December. So look for that information coming up as it's going to come out, as we're going to pump it out as soon as we have it. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Okay. Thanks, Brendan.